Hello, this is the CUDA and Open Lab seminar on March 2, 2026, and today it is our greatest pleasure to have Olivier Morin, who has a long track record dealing with tradition and cultural evolution, and today he will talk about how well designed are languages and other tools for communication, but he will also talk a little bit about evolution of writing. So basically you get a double feature today, two talks in one go. Olivier, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Maximilian. Thanks everyone for joining. So yeah, as you said, the menu for today is consequent. We discussed this with Maximilian by email. I said, no, I have two talks. Which one do you want? And he said both, which was flattering. So I said yes. And now I'm thinking, what have I done? This is going to be way too much. So I'm definitely going to do the first talk. And I'm really happy to get questions. Depending on how fast or slowly this goes, we can add stuff or not. The second talk is easy to cut into two different halves, so maybe I can do just half of the second one. So I'm really happy to be here. And without further ado, let me dive into my topic. So the first half of my intervention is about a very general question that is fundamental to any proper treatment of communication, primarily, and language secondarily, is the question of the fit between the tools we use to communicate and the goal that they are meant to fulfill. So we use language and other tools for communication, like writing, for instance, routinely for the purpose of conveying information from one mind to another. And we might ask whether these tools really are good at doing the job that they do. So the starting point of the talk is a relatively commonplace, although not a unanimously endorsed view, that communication is on the whole efficient. I call it the efficient communication view. It is a bit of a straw man, in the sense that nobody ever said exactly this in so many words. But it's a benign straw man in the sense that this is absolutely not absurd. It is not a view that I actually entirely reject. And it's been put forward in many ways, in many fashions, by several prominent researchers in cognitive science. Ted Gibson could come to mind, for instance, but there's just one name among many others. So the efficient communication view, today's benign straw man, is the view that language and other tools for communication, I'm very keen on the other tools part because as you will see right now and also in the second part probably, I'm extremely interested in means of communication that are not linguistic or paralinguistic, writing systems, gestures, graphic emblems, graphic codes, all that. So the efficient communication view says that these tools are shaped by their common function, which is communication. And that this function, communication, puts a pressure on them to be well designed for the purpose of communicating. And one major shaping constraint is efficiency. So tools for communication evolved culturally or biologically, doesn't matter so far, to be cheap to use in a way that is energetically efficient or cognitively efficient or both, since cognition also requires energy. This is quite a widespread view. The first part seems completely trivial. So the idea that tools for communication are good at what they do and they are shaped by their function, it actually isn't. The view that language has nothing to do with communication has been supported and defended most famously by Chomsky, for instance. So there is nothing trivial in saying that we can look at language, writing, gestures, graphic emblems from the point of view of communication. It is not trivial, but it does seem plausible that this is why we use them, and that in order to do the job that they do, they have to be efficient at doing it. Okay, so this is the starting point, and I'm going to try and refute it in a way that is not entirely radical. So I think the basic idea is right, but I think that it can lead us to the wrong predictions. So today's point is a cautious revision of this view rather than a full-blown refutation. Okay. I'll start with one example that is a paradigmatic example of the efficient communication view. You'll find it in many textbooks, and it's arguably one of the historically first instantiation of the efficiency view. It's the work of George Kingsley Ziff, who did not make much of a mark when he was alive. I mean, he had a major book that was recognized, but he died soon thereafter. And he started as a literature scholar, if I'm not mistaken. And so his ideas took time to infuse in the linguistics community. And he's mostly known for a phenomenon known as Ziff's law, which is extremely confusing because Ziff's law is not what I have in mind today. He produced three laws, so-called laws of linguistics. The first is Ziff's law. It's a law about the frequency of words. It says that the frequency distribution of words follows a power law-like relationship. Put that out of your mind. It's not the topic of today. But he also produced two other laws, the law of meaning and the law of abbreviation. The law of abbreviation is really a paradigmatic instance of an efficiency phenomenon in language. The law of abbreviation simply says that frequent words are short. Very simple. It's just a correlation. So the word low is a bit misleading. It is a correlation between word length and word frequency. That's quite obvious in the case of English, but it's also true in all other languages for which this has been checked. You find this correlation between word length and word frequency. So I'm just toggling. Yeah, good. Just checking my screen is okay. This robust, but as you can see, actually fairly weak correlation between word length and word frequency has been interpreted as a case of efficiency because it makes it energetically efficient to speak. If the words you pronounce the most frequency are also the cheapest, then the overall cost of uttering a word becomes cheap as well. This was intuited actually way before Ziff by Samuel Morse when he devised the Morse code. I don't know if any one of you knows what this is on the screen.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Letters. Movable type.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you. So this is a movable case type. And what Morse did when he was devising his code is he was working in a printing press and he just looked at those and said, okay, this is clearly the most frequent letter in the English language. It must be E or something like that. And this is the second most frequent. And all these ones are mostly rare. So I'm going to devise my code so that the most frequent letters, the ones that have the bigger square in the type case, get the simplest signal. So E gets just a dot and T gets a dash and so on and so forth. And rarer letters like Z get a dash, dash, dot, dot. And so that's really Morse had intuited the efficiency principle behind diff. If you are going to encode a letter often, you're going to make it short. Simple. Another instance of efficiency in language is the combinatoriality of speech sounds. This is a less famous and a bit harder to explain idea, but it calls upon the same notions of efficiency and of fit between purpose and structure in language. So an author called Martinet, who's a French linguist, was very famous, and one of the leaders of a so-called functionalist school of linguistics, made this point about phonology, that phonology is well designed to ensure efficient communication. And by well designed, it means several things, but I'm going to focus today on one phenomenon, which is the fact that speech sounds are combinatorial. By that, I mean that if you look at the sound system, the phonology of pretty much any language on Earth, you can boil it down to a few features. And this is particularly true, famously, of vowels. All the vowels that are known, pretty much. I'm not a phonologist, so there will be exceptions to be sure. But it's a very general trend that you can capture most of the vowels of the Earth's language with three features. So one of them being an approximation of aperture, so E versus A. Another being an approximation of back versus front, and so on and so forth. These three features capture all there is to the variation in the word's vowels. So you have only three dimensions of variance, 3 degrees of freedom that you combine to get all the possible vowels there is. And this, according to Martinet and others, is efficient. It allows communication to be cheap because on both sides, on the sides of the speakers and on the sides of the listeners, because it makes language easier to learn. In order to learn a sound system, you only need to learn a few features. It makes sounds easier to encode in your mind. When you hear the sound ah, you only need to encode a few features instead of a complete phonic representation. And it also makes sounds arguably easier to pronounce. At least that's what Martinet was arguing. So this is a case of language being culturally or biologically, who knows, evolved in order to be efficient for its purpose. Okay. So combinatoriality means that languages are speech sound systems are organized to combine a few features. But there's another aspect to this combinatoriality, which is that these features are used efficiently. Very famous example of that is the optimal vowel dispersion principle. So in a typical vowel system, you get what Dupuy and Dunbar call symmetry, which is very close to what standard phonology calls optimal dispersal. In other words, if you only have four vowels in a language, and one of them is E, another is A, another is E, you can bet with high certainty that the last one is going to be U and not or or un. Why? Because U is optimally distant from the rest. In other words, you have, for instance, two features here, and these two features determine four possibilities, and the vowels are placed at the very end of the space of possible vowels. So your degrees of freedom, your features, determine several possible sounds, and the way these degrees of freedom are used is to make the sounds maximally distinctive, maximally different from each other. And this is efficient from a perceptual point of view, because a language in which the vowels are maximally different from one another will make for clearer phonemic distinctions between words. So that is going to be easier for your brain to process them. And it's also been argued to be efficient from an articulatory point of view. Okay, so I just gave you two examples of this appealing idea, which is a research program for many people today, including me in some of my past work, that uh, tools for communication are efficiently designed for what they do. And this is an exciting research program for at least two reasons. The first, the one that I'm most attuned to, because I'm an interdisciplinary cognitive scientist. I do not study language per se. I prefer to study communication at large, and I focus on phenomena like graphic code, emblems, writing systems, and so on. The reason someone like me likes this idea is that it's fully general. It's not just about language. It applies to all tools for communication, and it's not keeping language apart in a weird way, like some trends of generative linguistics have might have done in the past. So it's a general integrated research program. Good. Another reason why it's good is that it's grounded in things that cognitive scientists understand very well, like information theory. I haven't mentioned it yet, but the ideas that Morse intuited and that Ziff found to apply, they can be directly grounded in information theory. We have tools to measure the information rate in a language, and we can use them to answer questions about the efficiency of information transfer in communication. So this is also a reason to go for this research program of efficient communication. Okay, and I've been doing that, some of that myself. I've been having great fun applying efficient communication principles, mostly to graphic communication, which is communication by means of images. For instance, with colleagues, we've been showing that letter shapes obey Zipf's law of abbreviation. In other words, letters that are frequent, they tend to be simpler and easier to produce than letters that are rare. And this is a direct application of an efficient communication perspective to writing. Shows you that the more frequent a letter, the more you tend to simplify it, which is directly an application of Zipf's idea. And it works very well, even better actually than it works for language. Another way in which we've been applying this idea with Browser is by showing that graphic symbols are combinatorial. I've been applying that to heraldry, to cattle brands, to lots of other ways that we communicate with images. So far, so good. And I really like this research program. All this to say that this is not a purely destructive talk. I really think there is something to be said for this general research program. But um, my point today is that we do not have a theory yet. When we say that uh, communication tools are efficient for what they do, are well designed for their purpose, this is not a theory. What I mean by this is not a theory is that it does not make predictions that other approaches cannot make. And it is largely a direction of research more than a set of verifiable claims. And I will take two examples of that, which came up by trying to apply these efficiency principles outside of language. So that I'm going to, well, uh, make a theoretical point and an empirical one at the same time. To illustrate my point, the best way perhaps is to go back to these two people whom you certainly recognize. That's William Paley on the left, well, lesser known. So maybe you did not recognize him, but you certainly recognized Charles Darwin on the right. It's a nice picture because they really are shown together on an equal footing as two important intellectuals, even though, of course, for us, Darwin is way better known and more celebrated than Paley. This probably has to do with their shared status as alumni of Christ College, where the picture is taken, but it also has to do with an important fact about the development of evolutionary theory. I know this is a bit of a digression, but bear with me, you will see the relationship later. So William Paley, as many of you will remember, was a creationist and a theoretician of biology before Darwin, before the theory of evolution existed, back in the days where creationism was pretty much the only game in town. And what Paley did is he looked at organisms, mostly animals, and he made an important remark that he developed at book's length that animal organismic features are well adapted for the function that they serve. A very famous example of Paley's is this crossbeak bird, which whose beak allows it to tear the small pine nuts in a way that makes it really easy and quick for the bird to eat the nuts. So Paley would go on and on and on and accumulate examples like that, showing that the features of the human body, the shape of the bird's beak, are really well designed for what they do. The problem is that Paley didn't have a good theory for why that was the case. He didn't have an idea of what mechanism caused the finch's beak to be appropriate to its use. The person who came up with that theory, obviously, as we know, is Charles Darwin, whose theory of evolution gives you a mechanism that is going to produce finches with beaks that are appropriate to their ecological niche, to the kind of food that they eat. Right. Why am I mentioning these two people? Well, I'm mentioning them because I think the study of communication right now is, well, to be optimistic, in a state of transition between those two. We have identified a series of reasons why communication is well adapted to its function. And we have a pretty good collection of case studies to show that. But we are still in the process of finding the mechanism that makes the features appropriate to the function. And so we are stuck with some of the same problems that William Paley had. Paley's problems were a lot, and some of them we do not have. We do not subscribe to the same worldview that is subscribed to. But like Paley, we have not necessarily much causal understanding of the phenomenon we're looking at. So Paley had to assume a divine intervention to explain why the finch's beaks are correctly designed. Paley was proposing a lot of post hoc rationalizations. So he could explain away any and all problematic facts. There was always a way in which the observations fit the theory. Famous example that was pointed out, I think, by Richard Dawkins was the human trachea. So as you know, the human trachea is not beautifully designed from the point of view of survival. It's very easy to get choke from a bit of food that has inserted its way accidentally into your trachea. So in that way, the human trachea is just not an adaptation at all. But Paley did not know that, and he had ways to rationalize that in all sorts of fashion. Another problem with the Paley way of theorizing is that it's confirmation only. He had this idea that organisms are well designed. He was looking for confirmation in nature, and he found it. But the problem is that there was no opposite way of putting forward refutable claims that nature could prove wrong. So as a result, he had an answer to everything, and therefore his theory just predicted too much, explained too much. And all this is tied to the fact that there was no plausible null hypothesis. He did not really consider realistic and specific alternatives to divine providence. So he had a claim that worked, but he did not have a counterclaim that he could compare it with. He could not engage in model comparison, to speak in jargon. So he had a correct claim, basically sound, that organisms are better designed than randomness, and that they are fit for the function of making the organism fitter. But he didn't have a theory yet, because he did not have causal understanding, he did not have refutable prediction, and he did not have a plausible null hypothesis to contrast them with. So my point today is that we are in the same, we're having a bunch of the same problems. The efficiency claim is probably correct, but it is not a theory yet. It makes few precise predictions that other approaches cannot make. And I'll illustrate that with two case studies. The first is about the law of abbreviation, which I already presented. And the second is about this idea that symbols are combinatorial. I start with the law of abbreviation. I already showed you the case with English. What's maybe also important to bear in mind is that it is a near universal, quote unquote, law of language. A law is really a pompous word for correlation, but the correlation is so robust, we really see it everywhere we look, that it really qualifies as law-like. I mean, it's as close to a law as we ever get in the study of culture, I suspect. It's something that you really see almost everywhere. Correlation is often weak, and you can see examples of that in these languages that I took from a really nice study by Benz and Cancho, but it is there every time you look. It goes further than language. You could say it's a near universal law of communication, and it's been all over the news lately because the law of abbreviation studies have gotten a new lease on life thanks to animal linguistics. So people who have found evidence of this law of abbreviation in non-human animal signals, like macaque vocal communication, penguins vocal sequences, and actually many others. The list goes on and on. So the law of abbreviation really seems to qualify as strong proof that the tools we use to communicate are shaped by their function in a way that makes them efficient. And so if we ask why the law of abbreviation occurs, a very natural explanation that comes to mind is an efficiency explanation. In his view, encoding frequent messages with shorter symbols, the way that Samuel Morse did, results in shorter message length overall, and that minimizes the cost. For telegraphy, it was especially important because these messages were costly. You paid by the letter, I think. And so you wanted the amount of bandwidth that you used for the telegraph to be small. And in doing that, Morse was intuiting a very basic principle of information theory, which was codified as Huffman coding, already intuited by Morse. It's the same idea. Huffman coding basically gives you the optimal structure of a code to be used to encode any message. And the answer is basically that you need to exhaust first all the possible simple symbols. So in the case of Morse, that would be the one dot, the one dash. Then you move on to the more complex symbols. That would be dot dash, dash dash, dot dot, dash dot. And then you move on to longer symbols and so on. And only when you have exhausted the simple, short, cheap symbols do you move on to longer ones. Okay, makes sense. but there are two problems with that. The first problem is what I alluded to in my Paley versus Darwin point. This is a functionalist claim that tells us languages are well designed, but it doesn't tell us how they came to be that way. The second problem is that it makes the wrong predictions. And this problem is probably more urgent than the first one. It's not just a philosophical problem. It really is a problem that drives the theory into the wall pretty fast. If languages were organized according to the Hoffman coding principles, it should behave in certain ways that are just not verified. For instance, you should observe that languages exhaust the space of possible short words before inventing any longer words. And they do not. In all the languages that have been checked for that, you have possible words that could exist, that are one syllable long, so they're very short. They're phonotactically possible. There's no problem with their structure. They're easy to pronounce. You could remember them fairly easily, but they are not words. They are just sounds. They have not been used by the language to form words. This is a violation of Huffman coding. Another clear prediction of the model is that the correlation between length and frequency should be tight. It should be strong, and it is emphatically not. The law of abbreviation is weak so this is again from the beautiful study by Ben and Ferreri Cancho, where we take the data from. I forgot to say, and this is an enormous mistake, this is joint work by me and Alexei Koshevoy, the postdoc now in my lab. So me and Alexei, we took the Benz and Ferrari Cancho data, and we looked simply at the strength of the frequency length correlation. And as you can see, it peaks at 0.3. This is not just because the data is noisy, because it's hard to measure word lengths in a precise way. You can compare the approximate measures based on orthographic lengths with more precise measures based on more phonological measures, and the correlation remains weak. Okay, and it's weak in a certain way. It's weak for a precise reason, which is that there are too many words that are both short and rare. So this is the example from English, where you see all the short and rare words here in the bottom left corner. Words like kvetch or glib and so on and so forth that are extremely pithy but definitely rare. And they should not exist if the correlation were strong. All this bottom left hand side part of the graph should be empty, and it is full. Okay, so in this paper with Alexei Koshevoy, we had a goal, which was to model the law of variation in a way that eschews functionalist assumptions. We are not appealing to efficiency at any point. We are never saying this is good because it makes language cheap to utter. And we also want a model that generates the real data, that generates values for the frequency length correlation that are weak in the range of plausible weak values. And also that are weak for the right reason, which is because there are too many rare and short words. Okay, so the general idea of the model, it's a fairly basic cultural evolutionary model, nothing very fancy here. It's a model based on the idea that speakers select words for brevity. They like brief words, but they are not in any way at any point calibrating length to frequency. So they are not saying, oh, this word is rare, therefore I will short word. So more frequent words are more likely to be encountered, transmitted, and selected. And because of that, more frequent words are more likely to be shortened, but only because they are more prevalent in the population, and therefore they are more likely to be subject to selection for brevity. So what selection for brevity does in this model is that it's going to affect frequent words most. So it's bringing down lengths in the high frequency range in the right part of the correlation. But on the left part of the correlation, it doesn't do anything because the words are too rare to be noticed by selective forces. And so these short words these rare words go under the radar, which does not mean that they get longer or shorter. It just means that the variance is preserved. So anything goes. They can be very short or very long. And what results is a correlation between length and frequency that is identical to the pattern that you see here, with no words that are both frequent and long, but lots of words that are rare and short. Okay, and so this is what the model looks like. We start with a population of agents and n agents. You can vary the number, obviously. And each agent has a lexicon, and the lexicon associates a certain number of meanings, and each meaning is associated with one word form. The word forms are randomly generated from a normal distribution of length. So we start with the assumption that words vary in length randomly, with a mean as a certain number of letters. Each agent at the start has a lexicon that is randomly seeded with a certain number of meanings, paired with a certain number of word forms. So what you get at the start is this agent, the green one on the left, has five meanings, and each is paired with a different word form. And the agent in blue on the right has the same meanings, M1, M2, M3, but they pair these meanings with different word forms. Okay. So now, at the start, these agents do not have anything like a shared lexicon. They know meanings, but each one has a language that is idiosyncratic, that pairs every meaning with a different word from the neighbors. Now they're going to interact, and they are going to have interactions about a meaning. And this is where we implement a very important principle that we also owe to ZIF. That's ZIF main law, the law of frequency. ZIF showed, and it's been confirmed many times afterwards, that the certain meanings are talked about much more often than others. In other words, you have a few very frequent meanings and many infrequent ones, and that is true of all languages. So we reproduce this in a model by making it the case that some meanings, for instance, M1 here, is going to be the subject of many, many interactions. It's going to be the case very often that agents meet and interact around this meaning. And other meanings, perhaps like M5 or M3 here, are going to be much less frequent. So agent A and agent B have an interaction about meaning, and the meaning that they interact on is randomly picked, the picking being weighted by the meaning's frequency. And frequencies are power law distributed, following the ZIF's main law. Okay. Now, the interaction can have one of two outcomes. Outcome one is adoption, and outcome two is selection. And we determine the probability of either outcome occurring by a selection coefficient, which is just the probability that selection occurs. So it's between 0 and 1. When adoption occurs, cultural transmission is basically neutral. I assume there's lots of cultural evolutionists in this talk, so you would know what I mean when I say that cultural transmission is neutral. It means that no variant has more probability than another of being passed on. So what happens in the case of adoption is that we flip a coin, and if the coin lands on heads, it's going to be agent A that passes their word form to agent B. And if the coin lands on tails, it's going to be agent B passing out its word form to agent A. Okay, this is the simple case, a neutral scenario. But if selection is what occurs, then we're going to select the shorter of the two word forms. So if A's word form, for instance, is key, and it's shorter than Scofio, then A is going to pass on its word form to B. And so both A and B adopt the shorter of the two word forms. Selection implements this idea that agents prefer short words. And you might say, well, are you not sneaking in an efficiency constraint here? Because this is basically saying that shorter is better. Isn't shorter is better an efficiency principle? And the answer is actually no. Shortening in our model happens irrespective of frequency. And this is a big departure from Huffman coding efficiency, where you have to calibrate the length of the signal to the frequency of the symbol. This is not at all the case here. Agents will shorten or not words regardless of their frequency. The second answer, and it's more of an empirical answer, is that actually there is no evidence from studies of communication that shortening is good for memory or in any way that would maximize information transfer. Shortening a word can degrade information. And we know actually from transmission chain that it's a very common phenomenon for transmission to shorten cultural input. This is what happens in most transmission chains that are published, where you have a single linear transmission chain where A transmits something to B, who transmits it to C. The result is often that the message gets degraded. And at the end, it's just too simplified and it loses informational richness. That degrades information and it can be actually detrimental. It can make words less distinctive. It can make words less informative. Okay. So now the population is going to evolve. The population evolves generation by generation. In step one, a certain number of interactions occur. We've already seen what interactions look like. They can take the form of adoption or they can take the form of selection. At step two, new agents enter, which we call mutation or turnover. It's basically the same in our model because the new agent enters the population with a completely reset lexicon. So this agent, the orange agent in the picture, it has new word forms for every meaning. And the percentage of mutants is a parameter that we can tune. It depends on the mutation rates. Okay, so this is the model. We have a population of agents. Each has a lexicon that associates meanings with word forms. The frequency distribution of meanings is Zipfian. At the start, word forms are randomly assigned to meanings. Interactions allow two agents to engage in social learning. And with probability S, the interactions obey a selection pressure for brevity. Okay. I'm going to skip the slides because I see I'm already short on time. The basic result that we get is that the law of abbreviation emerges under a broad range of parameters, and it is realistically weak. In other words, we get the law of abbreviation, but we also get the fact that the law of abbreviation is not strong. This shows you the heat map here, shows you the results from a range of model runs with the values for various parameters given here as a function of the selection pressure and the mutation rate. So the selection pressure is how likely is an interaction to result in selection, and the mutation rate is the rate at which new agents with a completely reset lexicon enter the population. And what we get are values for the law of abbreviation within the range of real values shown here by the dotted line. I'm going to skip this because it's taking me too much time, but you can see it's actually published. So there's a paper on this that you can refer to. So the important aspect of the model that we were keen on is that the law of abbreviation is weak, and it's weak for the right reason. In other words, it's weak because there's an abundance of short, rare words. So this is one simulation that shows you the pattern. You have log transform frequency on the y-axis and word length on the x-axis, and you can see that we have these words that are extremely rare but are still fairly long. Okay, so bottom line is that the law of abbreviation can be derived without assuming that speakers have any tendency to shorten frequent words specifically. You can have relatively high rates of selection for brevity, and they result in realistically low value from the frequency length correlation. Because this is one of the puzzles that we need to deal with. We know that cultural transmission is pretty ruthless with stimuli that are too long and too complex. Cultural transmission tends to reduce complexity. And transmission chains are very good at that. It's like a machine that reduces complexity, basically. And since the force for reducing length is so strong, we should assume the law of abbreviation to be strong as well, but it is not. And our model explains why it is not. Because the rate of selection is uniform for all words, regardless of their length, basically. So the weakness of the law of abbreviation does not mean that the selection for brevity is itself weak. You can have a very strong pressure to shorten words, and it's still going to result in a weak correlation between length and frequency. And in this model, we have never been introducing anything like a pressure for efficient communication, merely a pressure to have short words across the board, regardless of their frequency. And it's been actually shown in a very nice and recent experimental work by Walter Kirby and Arnon, published a few months ago, showing that the love abbreviation appears including in a non-communicative task, which kind of makes our point. Okay, the timing is out of hand, I'm afraid. So I'm probably going to take questions now as an interim point, and then move on to another case study. Go ahead, if you have questions.
Yes, thank you very much. We don't applaud because Zoom doesn't transmit it.
Totally fine.
If there's questions in the room, I have, nobody's lifting their hand urgently. Please think about it. I have one. What you said in the last sort of like 5 minutes, there's an interesting sort of comparison one could do to the dynamics of complex systems in general when you look at ranked systems, where we find these items which are low frequency, but they do recur. So they have a high fitness, but they sort of like recur all the time. Like in the past, we thought, oh, you know, like the canon of like most frequent words in a language, it would be like a canon of artworks, for example, that would recur. But that's actually not the case. There is some very, very rare artworks, which only 5 people see in 5 years, but 5 people in 5 years will look at them, like, you know, sort of like almost certainly. And so the question is, having that in mind, is there, you know, basically, what would be the temporal dynamics of this more generally, as opposed to just saying, okay, we got selection on the one hand, and sort of like this mutation thing on the other side. Like, can we quantify both sides? Because here's the cool thing in the dynamics of ranking, we can only sort of like, you know, get a hold of like the noisy part of the process, while fitness is different for every single item. While what you're talking about here is sort of a construction mechanism where these sort of like words sort of come from the same generating mechanism, at least, right? So how would that? It's hard for me to sort of like explain this more clearly, but like, so the idea is, do you see this as being even more broad than communication in general, beyond language, maybe extending to sort of like processes that of frequency and fitness, basically?
Okay. So your point is mostly about the frequency distribution, if I get it right.
So the point is about like you know, like this field or you know, sort of area of study of ranking found that we basically can study ranking dynamics, looking at word frequency, disease frequency, market capitalization of companies, and so on, with mathematical models that basically sort of like, you know, use what's called a Langevin equation, where one term is the fitness of the individual items, which obviously is super hard to get a hold of. Like, you know, why is the Colosseum so central and why is the aqueduct right down the road not, for example, right? Even though you could see the same picture. Or why are certain diseases sort of like so central, even though diseases which you have a comorbidity with that sort of are not so central. So this fitness is specific. While on the other hand, you can actually use noise to destabilize the system, for example, or by taking out noise to completely stabilize the system. So there's these two kind of processes, and these are typically sort of like trying to explain the frequency with a fitness term, which is individual to the object, and a noise term, which is sort of like more system level, you could say, or exogenous versus endogenous, or whatever you want to call it.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. So I'm basically drawing on the real, stylized findings on real language for frequency and putting them into the model. and I'm taking it for granted that there's going to be this Paolo distribution of frequencies. And the model is not aiming to predict frequency or rank distributions. I know it's a big topic in complex systems, and this work has often been used in this context. But really, this is not, sorry, a bit negative. I actually am very interested in this for other aspects of my work. I will email you about that because, but I don't want to stray away from my topic. So in this study, we're basically taking rank frequency distributions for granted and not trying to predict them. We're looking at the consequences of them. But actually, even if you remove the Paolo distribution of meaning frequencies, that wouldn't change the results at all because we do.
Okay. Mikhail Tom has a question.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you. It was very, very interesting and very beautiful model. However, it sort of, I understood in the process that it sort of conflicts with my, well, whatever mental model I had in my mind of how equilibrium word length is achieved. Because in the model there is no sort of etymological connection between different words. Yes?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I was sort of, well, I guess I was sort of thinking that the length of the words is sort of regulated by this process of abbreviation when we are dropping something or choosing the short things and constructing new longer words out of combining several meanings. Have you thought about somehow introducing it to the model, or how much it will change if you do it? Do you have any comment on that?
No, I agree. It's not a realistic model of word formation in any way. And we did not try to make it that way. We really wanted to make a conceptual point. The conceptual point is that the law of abbreviation is really easy to get. But there are other papers that have tried and sometimes achieved much more realistic models of word formation based on etymology, where you have actual processes like shortening and so on. So I think the point that the paper makes is does not depend on the nitty-gritty of word evolution. Because the point is really that it only takes the pressure for shortening to get the law. And it doesn't really matter how the pressure is expressed. It could be expressed by selecting short forms over long forms, but it could also be expressed by shortening forms that are already long. That's actually would be the same mechanics deep down, which is selection for brevity. Yeah. So the one thing I did not mention is that the most common mechanism that people use to explain the law of abbreviation is shortening. I cheated a little bit when I said we don't have a mechanistic explanation for the law of abbreviation. There is one, and it's based on shortening. And I think it's completely inadequate because we shorten. Imagine it's true that we shorten frequent words. Why don't we lengthen rare ones? You know, either because word length is not useful at all, and therefore there should not be long words. Full stop. Because we know there are plenty of short words that are unused. It is, and then it means we only optimize one way. And it's very mysterious. So the shortening explanation of the law of abbreviation is not, it's not how the law works, in my view.
Thank you.
Thank you. You raise a very interesting point here, which you can actually see in graphics over time, where sort of you have this concept of, or so the process of abstraction in a sense, and you can do this in various ways. Like one example I have in my PhD is like a satellite picture that is sort of like coarse-grained in a sort of like unknowing manner. So basically. Just basically taking edges between sort of areas of different colors, while somebody who is in the know would actually abstract the building in a way where you could still see the niches in the library and the toilet and like everything, right? And so there is different ways how you shorten and abbreviate. And obviously, one could debate if that's also true for words, but there is probably something in the relationship of meaning and form where you have the multidimensionality of the meaning being able to be folded into a smaller sort of like symbol set or not. Something we should look at, basically. This is hard for art because it's not easy to permutate all possibilities, obviously, which with words you may be more lucky, at least on the form side, right?
Yeah, it's interesting to look at it that way as a form of compression that may or may not retain information. I didn't think about it that way because maybe it's not, maybe I should. My departure point is I'm a strong believer in the idea of the arbitrariness of the signifier. So words have no relationship to their meaning that is particularly strong and that would help you guess the meaning of words you don't know. That's why I don't speak Estonian. If words were iconic, I would guess the meaning of Estonian words, and I cannot. So words are not a compressed version of the meaning like a photograph is to a reality. And that's the reason why I didn't think about things this way. But you can still ask the question, how compressible are words? So there's how much redundancy is there in a sound signal? How much information is there and how much can it be compressed? And this goes back to the idea of complexity. Because I think under length, there is complexity. So that's why what we did in the work on letter shapes, where we showed that letter shapes obey the law of abbreviation, is that we got rid of length because letters are not long or short in any interesting way, but they have complexity. And complexity basically is cashed in terms of compression. So how much, what's the minimal length of the description you need to reproduce the letter in a piece of code, for instance. So I agree that these issues of compression and compressibility are important to efficient communication. And deep down, that's what the Zipf's law of abbreviation is about. Because, yeah, I think there is a direct relationship between length and complexity and compression, which I cannot get into, but yeah.
Is there a way to sort of like, is there a moment when you think, oh, we should really take into account the sort of user of this system, where where you see that, oh, my agent-based model doesn't cut it because the agent doesn't have an actual hand and muscles that have to move in order to draw the character, in a sense, where there is always this kind of like sort of connection between form and meaning in a sense that you can't switch off, like brr, for example, for bromfiets in like the bicycle with an engine in Dutch is sort of something which you can't debate away that form and meaning sort of like are at least phonetically close together, and there it may be simpler even though it may not be the shortest because you have to sort of speak some R's in order to drive home the point, in a sense. Does it make sense?
I'm debating whether I want to get on my high horse about word iconicity, which is a topic that I'm I have strong opinions about, but it would take probably longer than I have.
Okay.
So I think that iconicity is one of these sexy phenomena that it's very easy to find examples for in a confirmatory way. Like the Paley strategy, if I'm thinking that language is iconic, I'm going to find lots of examples. And it only works at the cost of ignoring all the counterexamples that are around, which is all the words that are not at all iconic. Like the word iconic, for instance, or the word, etc. So that's why, but I have a longer version of this, which I will probably spare you. Maybe I could go on, and so hopefully it's going to be a bit shorter. So it's another study. This is a very scattered talk. I'm afraid I don't have one point to make.
No worries.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being such a patient audience. So this second part is about combinatorial symbols. So I've mentioned vowels and phonetics, but there are many other examples of combinatorial symbols. So on the left, you see a very standard, very nice actually, phonology textbook, the one by Lade Foged, Sounds of the World Language, if I get the title right. And this is textbook linguistics. It gives you the distribution of features for sounds of English, if I'm not mistaken. And so this is a nice example of combinatorics, where you have this, I don't know how many phonemes, that can all boil down to a few features. So each feature has up to four values, I think, usually two or three. And by getting these seven features with two or four values, you get the whole sound system of English. This is a nice aspect of symbols, that you can generate them by crossing together different features. And this is not unique to a language. I've also been studying a lot, way too much, heraldry, which is the coats of arms you find in Europe from the late Middle Ages to today, actually. They're still present. So these are emblems that an individual, a clan, a family, a city would use to advertise themselves, basically. And heraldry is extremely combinatorial in the sense that there are specific rules for putting together, a bit like Lego motifs, which are themselves generated combinatorially in many ways, with sets of colors and patterns. So you have three kinds of filling. You have what's called the metals. These are yellow and white. I will spare you the heraldic jargon. You have basic tinctures, that's red, blue, black, and green. And you have patterns like hermine or vert, which are called the furs. And there are rules for putting them together. I will spare you the detail. You have legitimate tincture pairings and others that are not okay. And by combining them, you can get a huge variety of designs. So I spent way too much time in my life working out the cultural evolution of this. I will spare you the details. But basically, what this shows you is that a very good way to produce many, many distinctive symbols, if you lack imagination or you need to give one unique identifier to many, many people in a city or a country, is to combine stuff like features, like you would do with Lego blocks. That's basically an efficiency explanation of combinatoriality. We have combinatorial symbols because it's a good, efficient way to produce numerous and distinctive symbols from features that are few enough that they will be easy to remember and easy to use. There is an alternative explanation, which is that maybe the combinatoriality of speech could be just a consequence of speech having limited degrees of freedom. So the example on the left here is extreme. Like this is very, very combinatorial. Heraldry, if you look at it closely, is nowhere nearly as combinatorial. For instance, the motifs, the list of possible motifs is endless. You have thousands of possible motifs. You do not have thousands of possible values for vowel height. You only have four. So this contrast suggests that there's something about speech that is extremely combinatorial, and maybe not just about the efficiency of combinatoriality, but also about the fact that speech has limited degrees of freedom. So this is the alternative I'm going to focus on today. The idea that combinatoriality may not be about efficiency, but it could be an expression of having few degrees of freedom. But before I go there, I need to make it clearer what I mean by combinatoriality. And this is the slightly technical side. I'm asking you to bear with me. So we started this paper. It's a study with Yulin Kim, Marc-Alain Saunière, Tang, and Elena Mitton about combinatoriality in but we realized very soon into the work that we did not have a really good definition of what combinatoriality was. So we split it into two dimensions, which will turn out to be orthogonal to one another, which is very handy. the two dimensions that we call feature informativeness and feature efficiency. Now, on the left-hand side of the slide, I have illustrated 4 different systems of symbols that are characterized by various degrees of both System A and System D. In System A, you have a system that has as little combinatoriality as possible. So System A is a system of 6 star shapes. And these 6 star shapes use different visual features. One feature is the number of branches to the star. Another feature is whether the star is circled or not. Another feature is whether the star is full or empty. And the last one, feature 4 is whether the star is fat or thin. And the last one is the size of the star. By the way, can you see my pointer?
Yes.
Oh, lovely. That's going to make things easier. So system A is like this, and then you have systems that vary in the number of symbols they have and in the way they use the features. I will start with the first dimension of combinatoriality, which we call, and this is not original, but we borrow this from work in phonology and computational linguistics, feature informativeness. Feature informativeness is an answer to the question, what are the odds that 2 random symbols differ on a given feature? So feature informativeness tells you if I take 2 symbols at random in this system and 1 feature at random, what are the odds that 2 symbols are going to differ? So I randomly pick this one, and this feature is having a circle or not, and I see that these 2 symbols do not differ on this feature. So this feature is not informative for those symbols. So feature informativeness, to give you an intuition, tells you how well the features are used by the system. If a feature like being circled is poorly informative, it means that the feature could be better used. For instance, you could put a circle on half the stars and no circle on half the others, and that would make the feature more informative. So for binary features, the feature is maximally high if exactly half the symbols have value 1 for this feature and value 0 for the other 50%. This is clearly not the case for system A, where all the features are used at the lowest possible level of informativeness that you could have. In system D, on the other hand, where you have many more symbols, all the features are used optimally. So informativeness is as high as it can be. You take any feature on the left, and it's going to be used optimally by the system. Number of branches, half the stars have 4 branches and half the stars have 5 branches. Circle, half the stars have 1, half the stars don't. This is informativeness, and it correlates well with a bunch of properties that have been shown to be true of phonology. For instance, remember I talked about optimal dispersal? The fact that when you have 4 vowels in a language, they are likely to be I, A, U, E. Well, this is a case of features being informative. It means that the different features that make up the vowel space are used as well as they could be. So vowels are as distinctive from one another as they could be, given the features that make them up. Okay, now to explain feature efficiency, I'm going to have to look at the whole range of systems here. So feature efficiency is an answer to the question, if you want to describe all the symbols in a system in the simplest possible way, how many features do you need at most to do that? And how many symbols do you have in the system? So it's basically a ratio between how big the system is, how many symbols it has, and how many features you need to describe all the symbols within the system. So we start again with system A. System A is quite small. It only has 6 symbols. And these 6 symbols, they exemplify 5 features. And in fact, you cannot have a system that has fewer symbols and instantiates 5 features, because the first feature accounts for 2 symbols. So you need 6 for 5. So that basically gives you an efficiency of 0. It's impossible to have a system that has as many features and fewer symbols. System D, on the other hand, again, is the perfect achieves perfection because it only uses 4 features. It does not use feature 5, and it still generates 12 symbols, which is the maximum number of symbols you can get from only 4 features. So it's optimal from the point of view of feature efficiency. Now you can have systems that are different. So for instance, system B and C differ in efficiency, differ in informativeness, but not in efficiency. So their efficiency is halfway between system A and system B. Okay, so these are 2 dimensions of combinatoriality. The first tells you how well the features are used, and the second tells you how many symbols you get from the features you have. So the first tells you about the quality of the symbols, are they distinctive enough given the features, and the second tells you about the quantity, how many symbols do you get from your features. And together, I think that these 2 aspects really capture what we mean intuitively by combinatoriality, the use of a few features to generate many distinctive symbols. Okay, so again, to rehash a point I already made, phonological features are efficient and informative. So phonological features are efficient in the sense of feature efficiency. A few features suffice to describe many different phonemes within and across languages. This has been called feature economy by Clements, and it's been used by other phonologists as well. You have 3 features and you capture all the vowels that you can imagine. That's really powerful. It's a form of feature efficiency. They are also informative, and I illustrated that with optimal vowel dispersal. Optimal vowel dispersal is an example of feature informativeness. Okay, now the goal of the paper is to look at letters because I love letter shapes, and it's one of my goals, one of my scientific goals to make letter shapes enter the field of cognitive science in a way that speaks to these notions of efficiency and informativeness. So letters in writing systems are a very good comparison with phonemes in languages because they play a very similar role and they obey similar constraints. For a start, they encode the same stuff. So usually in most writing systems, letters encode either phonemes or syllable or more rarely features. So they really represent the same kind of things. And they also obey similar constraints. They need to be easily stored, easily learned, and easily processed. You need to be able to produce and to process thousands of letters in a minute, just like you need to be able to produce and to process thousands of phonemes in a minute if you are a fluent speaker of any language. And on the look of it, by the look of it, some writing systems seem clearly to have this combinatorial logic, this Lego-like logic that we find in heraldry and also in phonology, where you create many, many symbols by using a few degrees of freedom systematically. This is an example from the Cree writing system invented by missionary James Evans and today used in many languages in native communities in North America, especially far north in Canada and Nunavut. So the Evans system, if you can see it here, it uses simple shapes that it rotates. It uses rotation a lot. And it will also use selective deletion. So you will remove the bar in the triangle and you will get a series of shapes that's identical except it removes the bar. Or you take that shape and you round it and you get C-like shape that you can also rotate and so on and so forth. So it's very systematic. It looks very combinatorial. But, this is just me looking at one writing system and forming an impression. There are no, until we did it, there were no systematic quantitative studies of combinatoriality in writing. We came to this with an expectation, which was that writing should be less combinatorial than speech. Why? Because there's a bunch of studies and theoretical writing arguing that movements of the hand are less constraints than movement of the tongue and mouth, to make a long story short. And this has been a reason, actually, why some people like Sandler have argued that sign languages are also less combinatorial than spoken languages. There's just so many ways you can move your hands, and so many ways, in this case, to write 2D shapes on a piece of paper that they are just less constrained. And so we thought that combinatoriality is not, in fact, something that just makes any symbol, any set of symbols efficient. It is more an answer to the reduced degrees of freedom of speech. And now the fun part was to test this. And this is a project I really liked because it's one of two projects that I managed to carry out. There are citizen science projects where we basically ask the entire world to contribute data to a study. We did this through a gaming applet called Glyph. It's down now. I hope to revive it in the next few months, actually, but you cannot go there right now. The purpose of Glyph was to build what we don't have. And what we don't have is a systematic classification of letter shapes, like linguists have with the sounds of languages. So if you ask a linguist, what is a fricative, what is a consonant, how do a sibilant and other sounds differ, they will have a ready-made answer from a century of research. They will have textbooks. I'm not suggesting that this is simple or trivial, not at all, but the work has been done in a very serious way. There is nothing like that for letter shapes. If, like me, you study letter shapes, first, you've made a very weird career choice. And second, you do not have a comparative toolkit in the same sense that linguistics have a comparative toolkit. You have nice descriptive tools for individual writing systems. So you have very, very elaborate ways of describing Latin letter writing or Chinese or Arabic, but there is no comparative cross-cultural descriptive vocabulary. So we wanted to build that, and we also wanted to do that in a way that does not place any theoretical prerequisites on the results. We didn't want to force the data to tell us a particular story. So we decided to crowdsource this, to ask anyone on the internet to help us make up classifications of letter shapes. And it worked. We got several thousand participants, and these participants played a lot. So they proposed 80,000 classifications. I'm going to explain you what a classification is right here. So the applet looked like this. You have a short tutorial that you could click on by clicking on this banner. And once you had finished with the tutorial, you were offered a choice of scripts to play, and the scripts belong to a very broad range of scripts. We aimed for maximal, well, not maximal, because there are always things that you cannot get, but for a broad chunk, a big chunk of the variance in linguistic provenance, so language families, semiotic, the semiotics of the system, whether it is syllabic, logosyllabic, alphabetic, and so on, and typological variation. So you could pick, take your pick of any writing system here, and you click on it, and you start playing. So here I take the example of New Tai Lue, which is a script for the language Tai Lu. It's a language of Yunnan, but you would not know that it's Chinese, well, geographically Chinese by the look of the letters, since they have nothing to do with the Chinese writing system. You don't know anything about New Tai Lue, I assume, and that's just fine because we really want to get people's intuitions about the letter shapes. So we want their intuitions to be about the visual form of letters. And it's very good, actually, that people have no idea what these letters encode in terms of sound syllables. Here, I think it's syllabary, so it would be syllables. So the only question we're asking you is classify these letters into groups based on some criterion that makes sense to you. And the criterion could be absolutely anything. You might think like, these two look like clipboards. So I'm just going to group them together. And also this one looks like a clipboard. So I'm going to make a group of 3. And the definition of the group will be letters that look like clipboards. And that's fine. Or letters like look like peanuts. That's also fine. Anything goes as long as you can be consistent with it at a later stage. So here I took the example of letters that have a rounded shape at the bottom, a close rounded shape at the bottom. So these are all the letters that, except one, I forgot in my example to click on this one actually. All the letters that have a close rounded shape at the bottom are represented. I click on those letters, I click next to validate my choice, and then the website asks me to describe my rule. This is handy for two reasons. The first is that it gives us data that we can mine using, for instance, LLMs about what are the representations that people have in their mind when they make these classifications. And the second reason why it's useful, you're going to see in a minute. So I type this description of my rule with all the letters under my eyes, and I click on Finish the rule. At this point, I need to wait for 3 minutes, which is a minimum time. It can be more, it can be days, it can even be weeks, before I'm asked to replicate my selection. So what the applet is going to do is that it's going to ask me to reproduce my selection, and it's giving me the prompt I gave it before, closed shape at the bottom. And based on this prompt, I need to replicate the selection of letters that I did on the same letters, but in a scrambled order. So I need to find again all the letters that have a closed shape at the bottom. And this shows that there is, as you would call it in psychology, intra-rater reliability, that you agree with yourself at time t plus 3 minutes or more. This is important because it allows us to weed out classifications that are just too weird to be replicable, classifications that are just too difficult to apply, where people do not that do not make internal sense. In other words, when you do that, you earn points. This is the gamified part of the applet, and we, long story short, feed this to an algorithm. Decision tree classification algorithm that selects the set of classifications that are the best at identifying all the letters in scripts. So here I'm taking the example of Tagbanwa, which is a script from the Philippines. Tagbanwa is handy because it's very short. It only has about 18 letters, I think. And we got thousands of classifications for Tagbanwa. So this whole procedure has been done thousands of times by hundreds of people for the Tagbanwa script. What do we do with these thousands of classification? We want to determine the best set of classification that can help us uniquely identify all the letters in the Tagbanwa script. When I say uniquely, it means that you want a set of rules. Remember, these are binary rules. A letter belongs to the group or it does not. We want to determine the set of binary rules that gives to each letter a unique binary identifier. This is the case here with the 9 rules that we identify. So the letter here, it is 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0. And there is no letter that has the same binary, that corresponds to the same binary string. And each of the letters in Tagbanwa corresponds to a different binary string. The algorithm has determined that all the rules here, and only them, are sufficient to produce that result, to give you a unique description of all the letters in Tagbanwa. These rules are as they came from users. We did not ask them anything to make any theoretical sense. And some of them, they correspond to what I would have imagined would be the right way of classifying letters, because I've been writing about letter shapes for quite a while. So I was expecting to see things like closed shape, topology. Is there a closed shape, or is it topologically open? I would also expect things like it can be written in one single stroke versus you need to make 2 movements of the hand. So these I expected, but there are things that I totally never expected, like V shape, which makes sense when you see it, but is not something I would have expected. Open at the top. Many people said it can hold water, which makes sense in context, but it would definitely not work for many writing systems. So we left that as it is. We did not want to impose any constraint on participants' imagination. The glyph classifications are meaningful. They are not just what an algorithm spits out. They really do predict people's judgment for similarity between letters. They really capture something about the distinctiveness of letter shapes. To show that, we can look, for instance, at the very simple measure, the Hamming distance between 2 letters. So the Hamming distance is simply the distance between 2 binary strings, and it tells you for each of the possible values the number of values on which two strings differ and the number of values on which they're identical. Here we take this letter here and this letter here, and we look at how distinct they are using the 9 rules. And we see that they are different on this rule, different, same, different, same. And so the Hamming distance normalized is 5/9. That's 0.55. This Hamming distance correlates pretty well. It's not perfect, it could be better, but it's better than any of the algorithmic tools that I've seen being used to determine similarity between black and white drawing. At least it was at the time of our last submission. Maybe it's progressed since then, but it's still pretty decent. We do capture what participants feel when we ask them to rate the perceptual dissimilarity between two letters. So this shows you each dot here is a shape of letters, is a pair of letters, and the colors are different writing systems. So if you ask people how different these two letters are, the answer is going to reflect the Hamming distance. So we have a system that manages to give us a complete description of all the letters in 43 writing systems across the entire world, which is an absolute first, and B, correlates decently with people's judgment of visual proximity between shapes. Good. This is what the results look like for our two measures. Remember, we have two components of combinatoriality. One is feature informativeness, how well the features are exploited to make the symbols maximally distinctive. And the second one is efficiency. How many symbols do you get for a certain number of features? I will start with efficiency. So efficiency varies a lot in between writing systems. On the right-hand side, you have OGAM. Those of you who went to Ireland or have Irish roots might know about it. It's an ancient script for Irish, the Gaelic. OGAM is just about the most efficient script that we could think about, in the sense that it has very, very few features. So the features are in OGAM, just to zoom in a little bit. For most of the letters, you can boil it down to 4 questions. First question, are there bars above, below, or on both sides of the dividing line? Second question, are the bars oblique or not? And third question, how many bars are there? That accounts for all the variants in the first half of the script, and then for the other ones, we need to add a few features, but not many. So OGAM really has a very, very few features, and from those features, it manages to yield a decent 26 symbols, which is as many as our alphabet. On the other side, you have Kayali, which is a Southeast Asia script that also have almost the same number of letters, but it has many, many more features. And some of these features are never reused elsewhere. So there are things that are reused, and so that makes the system efficient. But for instance, this shape here, you could invert it, you could rotate it, and the system never does that. It does it with other letters. Intuitively, I think you could, it speaks to our intuition that OGAM is kind of more combinatorial, more rigid, less varied than Kayali. For the same number of letters, Kayali has more features, more dimensions of variation, more ways for letters to be different from one another. And then on the other axis, we have informativeness, which is how efficiently used the degrees of freedom are. So if you take one feature at random and 2 letters at random, how likely is it that the 2 letters are identical on this feature? We already saw Tagbanwa, and Tagbanwa, it's worth reflecting, is extremely efficient for at least a few features. So for all these 2, I've ranked them from most to least efficient. From most to least informative. So this feature V-shaped here is extremely informative. If you know whether a letter is V-shaped or not, you can already rule out 50% of the letters, because roughly half of the letters have a V shape and the other half definitely doesn't. Same for open at the top. this is not open at the top, this is not, but this is, this is, this is. And when you know the answer to the question, is it open at the top, you can already rule out 50% of the letters. This is actually pretty rare. And Tagbanwa turns out to be one of the systems where the features are most informative. Many systems are less informative, like I took the example of Cherokee here, which is a writing system that was invented by an admirable Cherokee intellectual called Sequoyah. He knew about the shape of Latin letters, but he could not write English or any other language in that script, but he invented a Cherokee writing system based on that. And a Cherokee writing system has many, many, many letters, but it's actually not, it doesn't have a few features that you would combine efficiently. There are many, many ways for the Cherokee letters to vary, in other words. Another cool aspect is that these two things are completely orthogonal for letter shapes. In other words, the correlation is exactly, and I kid you not, 0.00, which I've never found in my life. So it's a first. So they are completely uncorrelated, which means that we get two axes of combinatoriality that we can separate. Okay, so we have this data set of 43 scripts that we studied through the glyph applet, and we're going to compare them with phoneme inventories from a beautiful database called PBase, maintained by Milke, and the standard database is we also use a lot the work of Maki and Milke for this. And the nice thing about PBase is that the way that the phonemes are coded is exactly similar to the way that we have been describing letters. So instead of letter shapes, imagine phonemes. And instead of these visual properties, imagine phonetic rules. And it's exactly the same. The phonetic features are binary. And each sound in a P-based dataset can be coded as 24 binary phonemic features. We made two predictions. The first is that feature economy is lower in scripts. The general prediction being that scripts are more combinatorial than letters. And this is the case. So if you look at scripts versus phoneme inventories, you're going to see something that's quite striking, which is that the number of features you need to get a complete description of a script increases linearly, roughly, with the script size. To give you an idea, if I have a script of 18 letters, like Tagbanwa, I'm going to need only 9 features to account for all the letters in this script. But if I grow my script by 2 letters, to get a script of 20 letters, I'm going to need 1 extra feature. And that's basically the way it goes. Every time you add 2 letters, you need to add 1 feature. In phonemes, that's completely different. You see that the number of sounds, the number of features per sound grows at first within the range of 8 to 15 phonemes. But at some point, you reach a wall. And at this point, it means that with around 15 features, that's all you need. You can grow your system to 60, 70 phonemes, and you're not going to need to add features. So you can use the features you already have and add new sounds, which is never the case with letters. With letters, every time you add a new symbol, you need to add a new feature. And this translates into lower relative efficiency. I didn't give you the stats for how I compute relative efficiency, but I can. They are in the next slides for question time. Second prediction that we made is that feature informativeness is lower in scripts. Remember, feature informativeness is this property, for instance, in Tagbanwa, that you use the degrees of freedom optimally. You have this feature that's V-shaped. Half of the symbols are V-shaped and the other half are not. The opposite of feature informativeness is when features are low in information. Like this feature here is low in information. It only picks apart 2 letters versus all the rest. We find that feature informativeness is much higher in phoneme inventories compared to scripts. And in some cases, it's almost as high as it can be, whereas this is never the case in scripts. Okay. Sorry, it's here. It's almost as high as it can be, I said, because in some inventories, it's actually perfect. To do that, we had to separate vowels and affricate consonants for reasons that I could get into, because not all features apply to all classes of sounds. So we separated two categories of phonemes. But it doesn't make much of a difference to the eventual results. It's quite admirable, actually, that some systems of vowels mostly are actually perfect. So you cannot improve upon them. They have the exact ideal number of symbols for a given number of features. That is just never the case for letters. Okay, that's my second point today. Letter shapes are actually not that combinatorial, and this argues in favor of a view of combinatoriality that is not as much based on efficiency as on practical considerations, such as how many degrees of freedom do you have. We find that written languages combine many visual features in a way that's not very informative, which suggests that you can multiply features for letter shapes in ways that are not very constrained culturally. Whereas for phonetics, every time you add a feature, it has to be justified. You combine a few phonological features and you make the most of them. So both types of expression have numerous distinctive symbols, but only spoken language is strongly combinatorial, which tells us that combinatoriality may not be that much of an efficient feature of communication. Right, gonna wrap up. Again, the efficient communication claim is a benign straw man. I think it's worth keeping in mind that it's probably false, but doesn't make it a bad guide for research. It only tells us that we need to make it more precise, turn it into a genuine theory to make it work. Right now, it makes few precise predictions that other approaches cannot make. And we know that in two cases. The first is the law of abbreviation, which, as we saw, can evolve without any pressure for communicative efficiency. And the second is combinatoriality, which is actually variable and maybe just a response to reduced degrees of freedom. Thank you, and I would like to give big thanks to my co-authors on this, Alexei Koshevoy for the Zitian paper, and Elena Mitton, Mason Youngblood, and Yulin Kim for the glyph paper, Yulin Kim and Marc Alassonière-Tang for the glyph paper. I also did a lot of work on these ideas with James Winters and Mason Youngblood and many others that have contributed to reflection on graphicals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This was great. There's clapping, and again, Zoom doesn't transmit it. Yeah, this was great. I have there's a question in the room, so I don't have to ask the first question. Yes, Andres Karius.
Hi, Andres. Nice seeing you. It's been a while.
I'm very happy that you gave this talk, because it's something I've been thinking about and recently as well, and I've been wondering, and incidentally, you're here, so I can ask you this question. So you're basically treating these symbols almost like part of, as if a visual culture, like how they're drawn, how they're distinguished and so on by visual features. So I'm wondering, have you thought about applying the same things to other things in visual culture? So for example, like you could replace these symbols there with emoji or traffic signs or elements in medieval fine art, for example.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, that's totally the kind of thing I would do. So I did it with heraldry, which is a part of European visual culture, looking at the combinatoriality of it. And it can be done with so many things. So yes, that's definitely totally doable. And so the work we've been doing on that was mostly on emblems. So we've been looking at that. Sorry?
Yeah, I've seen the emblem stuff. Yeah.
So do you want to ask more about that? Because otherwise I'm just going to give you an overview of combinatoriality in emblems, but maybe you want to ask more about art?
Yeah, I recall the emblem papers, but have you thought like more broadly about like exactly like art or any other symbol systems?
Yeah. So I've been looking recently at decorative art, which seems to be well, I have that this kind of book under my desk, Uh, these are basically grammars of decorative art from many cultures. Gives you the library of patterns that people would use to illustrate a manuscript or a piece of furniture or a jewel and so on. And so I would love to do some systematic work on this. I have started. There is some literature in mathematics and geometry on that, but it does not speak directly to combinatoriality. And here I run into exactly the same problem I had with letter shapes, which is, where is the textbook? Where's the phonetic alphabet? Find the source that tells me, this shape goes into this category and this one goes into another. There is no such thing. Um, and I don't want to machine learning my way out of this because I'm interested in the human brain and how we perceive shapes and so on. So I'm really excited about working on this, but it is very hard, I must say.
There's a thing one can add, which is actually in your system by itself, right? If you have this classification of letter shapes versus what people assign it to, you get this sort of like, you question sort of what's the alphabet here, because you will get a confusion between the classifications people come up with. And I find it really neat that you use sort of Hamming distance to sort of like measure the difference, because that puts a huge elephant in the room, which is if you get a perfect Hamming system, you get a hypercube. Everything has the same sort of like probability, and there can't be just like combinatorial. There cannot be clustering, and that is a sort of weird thing because all these writing systems have these sort of like similarities where you say, oh, there's this V shape, there's this sort of like round stuff, there's this sort of like three things together. And humans are so acute to seeing these patterns that it's even like if you look at white noise, we do this. So the question is, how do we sort of like overcome this tension? Not even talking about like what you've just shown us. Every art historian has tried to crack ornaments since like 200 years and all fail because indeed, as you say, there's no art, there's no alphabet basically.
You're cheering me up.
Sorry.
I have an ongoing study on the phrases, because phrases and tie links, you do have a descriptive vocabulary. There's only like 7 possible black and white phrases, and I forgot the number of possible tie links. So there's an angle here, but it's people who tried did not, well. Yeah, they were not academically successful, let's put it that way, in the sense of convincing a broad range of academia that it spoke to themes that are typically studied by art historians. But I mean, you and I have the same problem here. It's hard to convince people outside of our interdisciplinary fields. Where was I? So you were saying if you have a perfect Hamming distance, there is no structure.
So if you have if your word length is 4, 0 ones, then you get a 4-dimensional hypercube, and every corner is equally probable, and so there is
no pattern. But that's very close to how phonology works, if you think about it. So there are very few clusters, and so it's doable. Culture can do that, or probably culture in that case. You can totally have systems like that. Another system that does that, it's a bit anecdotal, but it's divination. The I Ching shapes. So it's this Chinese divination system with you have 6 sticks, if they are broken or not, 64 combinations, 2 to the power of 6, and or 6 to the power of 2. I always get it wrong. Sorry. No, 2 to the power of 6. And so you have all the possible combinations are saturated, and there is no structure. There is no cluster. All the shapes are, as distant as possible from one another. So we can do that. It exists. You have cultural symbols that look like this, but very, very, very rare. And no writing system ever looks like this at all.
And a follow-up, so there's this other side, which is sort of like not the combinatorial one, but the human body, right? Like you say, there is less limitation in the human hand than there is in the voice, but obviously that's countered by the voice being the most general synthesizer of sounds. If you're trained well, you can produce any sound. It's much better than any musical instrument, except for maybe whatever electronic thing you have. But even then, not. While your hand, if you draw, I don't know, I do this every day. My arm muscles, they're bounded. So I get curves, which I try to sort of get out of, but like you fall into them. So in some sense, is this something where you would say that's really a natural kind of state of being, or is it something like something that evolved, or something that is actually really enculturated? Like do we restrain ourselves more as we speak, as we would do when we draw or write, for example? By culture, not because we cannot.
Yeah, it is a good question. There is a speculation out there that phonology is artificially impoverished.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, again, it's very speculative, but it's possible, almost probable, that we lost clicks. The clicks that exist in several African languages like Khoisan. So this is one degree of freedom that we could use, and languages don't, by and large. So there are degrees of freedom that we seem to be just losing, or buzzing, or whistles, or all these things we can do with our mouth that we don't use. So there is a story that is about cultural drift and loss, that just by random accident, you have this complex system that gets whittled down to something poorer. So it's possible that this is a really cultural reason. But then again, you can get the same kind of story for sign languages, and it doesn't really seem to happen. Sign languages are very rich. They have many different features. Because the effectors are so many, you have the fingers, you have the hand, you have the arm, you have the upper arm that can vary location, then you have everything your face can do. So combinatorics are huge. And they don't seem to grow poorer. If anything, the opposite seems to be the case. So I don't know. Could be true about phonology, but I'm not. I feel a bit. I'm not a phonologist at all, and so I should be careful about what I say, especially if it's on YouTube, even if it's not.
I hand it over to Mike, Tom.
Yeah, well, basically, I had this maybe a little bit stupid question, which is partly motivated by looking how kids are writing. Basically, my question is: it seems to me that classifying by visual shape might be different from classifying kinesthetically by what is the sequence of movements you need to make. And have you thought about sort of what is the correct way and how different they might be?
Yes, absolutely. It's a good point. The psychology literature gives you argument to say that when you perceive a shape, you do tend to perceive the gesture behind it. So you have a kind of a kinesthetically colored, if that makes any sense, perception of shapes. You don't see just an A, you see this. So in that sense, yeah, it would make a difference. And the ideal study for this would probably involve the kinesthetics at some point. But that would involve getting data that for some systems, they are ancient, and no living writer is there for the originals, so we don't know. So yeah, I think it could be argued that even for perception, there is an element of motor inference. Still, it's your eyes that do the work. And if there is any motor information, I suspect it comes downstream. So you still need the shape to make a visual sense. So I prefer to focus on vision also because, let's face it, it's easier that way. But yeah, if I had data on kinetics, there are papers that use kinetics data to do comparative studies, but it's very unsatisfactory. It's mostly asking a research assistant to produce a shape. And I don't know that it would make an enormous difference to the results. Ah, what's the book? Oh, it's one of those classic, it's called le Dictionnaire de l'ornement. There's also, it's by Racinet, the French compiler. There's a grammar of ornament is the same for the English, and it's I don't know which one is a copy of the other, but they resemble each other very much. I'm not saying it's a good book. No, because the problem is that it's really made for artists that need ideas, but it is not scientifically sourced. So you get a bunch of Egyptian cat heads, and you have no idea where they come from. Just says Egyptian cat heads. So there's nothing you can do with it if you're doing database research.
So that is a sort of opening a really big question, which sort of like in art history, as I said, is sort of like keeping busy for quite a while. And so one of the interesting things about architecture and design, people try to sort of define design language, architectural language, ornament, and stuff like that. And then, people they define this in a textbook, and then people learn it in a textbook. And then you think it's innumerable, and then, you learn architectural theory and ornament, and then you look at an actual piece of architecture and you figure out, the Romans, they didn't care about it at all, but they sort of like do 100 different versions of what you think there should only be 3 or 5. And so that is sort of something which I think is sort of quite interesting also in this respect, that if you have a writing system, if you have language, there is obviously something you need to, you don't have that luxury because you need to sort of like communicate, which gets back to this communicative need. And there, my favorite comparison in this is, I always wonder if people actually can imagine the gesture, or if this is only people who can imagine the gesture can imagine the gesture. Like to make this more clear, does somebody who can skate or ski sort of see the move in the same way as somebody who cannot?
Oh, no, the answer is no. And there's been actually in the lab next door, a neuroscientist called Julie Grez has done lots of work on this, looking at dance motions. So she did it's based on neuroimaging, but you can find behavioral equivalents of those. So basically, if you know how to dance capoeira, you don't look at capoeira the same as if you watch ballet and you are a ballet dancer. So yeah, there's an interplay between perception and motor activity. And it's certainly the case for letters. Like I look at a Chinese character, I don't see the sequence, but a Chinese writer would, because it's very normed. So you have to start.
So is this where sort of the source of the law of abbreviation could come from? Because, when you're forced to speak to many people with very different ideas of what this currently means, then, it's sort of like you would transmit just a lot of information which most people can't unlock, right?
You mean for letters? The fact that frequent letters are simpler?
So to give you the inverse, people spent ages to do typography and typeset text, right?
Yeah.
Kerning, the shape of the letters and stuff like that. And there's so much going in there. And I think you tried hard with your glyph selection to sort of have, sort of an even width of line and stuff like that. So you basically very decidedly do not do typography. Which in some science systems that may work, but certainly for Latin characters that doesn't work at all, because there is a lot transmitted with typography, isn't it?
I know. So this is one of my the frequently asked questions. So I don't do typography because I'm already in a niche, there are degrees to specialization. So the reason I don't do typography is that I think the cognitive science of writing has gone very far astray by not looking at enough variance. So if you look at the cognitive science of writing literature, it's Latin, Arabic, Chinese writing. That's about it. Instead, we really need to expand the focus. We need to look at as much variance as we can. And that's something that, because an anthropological view is not so widespread in our fields, people don't see the point of. But I'm a cultural evolutionist, and I really want to know how culture evolves. And for that, you need independent data points, and you need to find them as far away as possible. You really need to increase variance. That's the key to have statistical power in our fields, is to look at many different cultures. I get very preachy about this because I don't think the point is often comes across. And so that's the reason for not looking at typography, because when you're looking at typography, you're looking at the variance inside one specific script. And I can prove that the variance is not as high as people think inside the little Latin world, which we actually do not look at all in Glyph. Like I wanted to do a study with that Latin script. Who cares? It's just one script. So no typography, no looking at the usual suspects, no Greek, no Latin, no Arabic, expanding the variance. And I think that's what we need to do if we study decorative art as well. If we study pretty much anything, we have to be very, very attentive. I don't really like the slogan that psychology is weird and that we study the West too much. I have objections to that. But I do think that we need to be really attuned to expanding the variance. So that's why I'm not looking at typographic differences, because that's a very, very small fraction of the variance within one writing system.
There's one last question from Andres, and then we have to actually wrap up.
Okay, well, maybe that's a good last question then. Because it's an open question, what do you feel is like the biggest gap right now, like the hardest thing right now that hasn't been solved? That you mentioned several times that you're in a niche, but in that niche, what's the hardest thing right now, or in terms of like scaling or solving, besides the nobody having actually a dictionary, but other than that?
Okay. Well, it depends. There was really two talks into one. So for the first talk, the question of the efficiency question, I think there's really a need to combine mechanistic accounts of communication with efficiency-based accounts. To have this functional narrative that kind of works. It's often true that language is well designed for communication, but the mechanistic account lags behind, and it often cached. It's the current strategy, I think, is the right one. Most people who care about that question think it has to be answered in some kind of cultural evolutionary fashion. That's what we did in the law of abbreviation paper. We did a cultural evolutionary model for it. But we are not there yet. We don't have a cultural evolution of communication efficiency account, and this is hot in the sense that the efficiency account is represented in many conferences, and language evolution is also maybe a hot topic, at least very much a live one, and the conjunction of the two is exciting. For letter shapes, there is no hot topic because this is not a hot topic, but it is for me. And for me, the Graal, the holy grail of research, is to find a unified graphic vocabulary. So what I showed you with the Tagbanwa was just people's classifications for letters, how they see letters, but there's no unity to it. And the criteria are completely idiosyncratic. You have to apply them to one system, and they don't work for the others. Just like the grammars of ornament that Maximilian was talking about. So we can do better, and I started to do better, and that's what the new iterations of Glyph are going to be about. We already started to do that in a paper that we published. We have a set of 9 rules that apply to many, many systems. It's not enough because they are not yet, they do not explain everything, so they do not uniquely describe all the letters. And we suspect there are more to be uncovered, but that's the next frontier, to be sure.
Excellent. This was amazing. Thank you very much, Olivier. I need to do what I do every week. I will announce the next one, which is next week. And we're going to stay with, I would say, art history, not art history. We will have Elizabeth Bick, who is well known for debunking all sorts of papers. The talk will be Errors and Misconduct in Biomedical Research Images, which is relevant because it's about the culture of science and sort of creative aesthetics and critical aesthetics. But at the same time, it's relevant because most of our figures in any other disciplines often are first invented in biomedical papers, so we should probably know what's going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye.